Alan, thank you. Welcome, everyone. And I really wanted to just walk you through in the next 20 minutes or so how we went through this year. It all started actually with mid-staffs, and the government, in its infinite wisdom, decided after the mayhem of mid-staffs on a slightly knee-jerk response, if you like, that it wanted surgical outcomes out there for all our patients to see. It then produced about this time last year, it was about October of last year, the new NHS, as it called itself. And it called itself Everyone Counts, and then there was offer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all of this was aimed at improving the outcomes of what we do to patients. And when it said it wanted publication of clinical audits for every practicing surgeon. And obviously for us, that's urological surgery. However, as we all know, in urology, we don't have a single procedure undertaken by every urologist. And so there was our first quandary. The second quandary we had was none of our audits are nationally funded. We've funded them, or you've funded them, if you like, through your subscriptions, etc., and the funds that we get in from all our activities. And we've been going now, if you go back to the old days with Sarah and the Access databases, back to 1998 and beyond. So we were coming from a very weak standpoint. The first I got was a call from the then Chief Executive HQIP, which was in early January of this year, saying, just to let you know, this is coming down the tracks, they've made a decision, and it's going to hit you hard. And it was formally announced on the 4th of February. We had a meeting with HQIP, who were the designated body who were going to run with this from the government 3 weeks later. And I had made that decision through sort of Jan and into Feb that the easiest way for us to come up with something was to look at nephrectomy. There were pros and cons to that, but I just felt on a numbers game for the individuals involved, it was going to be the easiest way we could pull something together. And we were given this deadline date of publication was going to be the 28th of June. The problem we have with nephrectomy is that only about 40% of urologists do nephrectomy, and only about 30% were regularly uploading the data. But what they'd upload often was the demographics and the operation, and we had an even weaker area when it came to follow-up data. So that left a large contingent of you having to retrieve data within something like 10 weeks. And many of you had little or no support from your trusts in trying to pull all that together. And we also had to work from a baseline. What was the numbers that we thought we were looking at? And the only way we could get an idea was to go back to the HES data, which is England's coding data from 2011, to give us a potential number that we should be looking at. So here we go. I decided that we should look at all the nephrectomies done in 2012. The HES data for 2011 for England showed that it was just under 7,000 nephrectomies were done by urologists. I excluded those that might have been done by transplant surgeons or vascular surgeons. I just looked at the coding that was done by urologists. And we collected 5,449 cases from 283 consultants at 119 centres. And on the numbers game, we thought we had about 80% of the nephrectomies done. That worked out as a median number of cases per consultant of 14 and a median number of cases per centre at 37, with quite a range, as you see here. And what we don't know is whether those that were doing 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, from the data that they entered, but they actually did 15, but didn't have the time, energy, effort, whatever, to put in the last cases. And so there's a huge validation issue, which I'll come on to as we go through the talk. And this is how it began to look as that it was coming out. The government was keen we used NHS Choices. We were keen that it was actually the BAUS website and it was a link to NHS Choices. And Sarah and Tricia worked very hard at putting it into this sort of pictorial format with Nigel Bullock on the website. So you go into your region and you look at the regional data from there. You'd then go into more of the centre data, which are all you could click on the left-hand side if you're a patient or interested on the relevant hospital, and you'd then get the individual consultants listed, and you could look at then the individual data. And you got the number of cases, whether benign, malignant, open, laparoscopic, etc., etc. And then we worked out this structure for morbidity according to centre and by the individual. And again, those red lines were a little bit arbitrary. They were chosen by the data that went in. And if you came over the red line, that raised a bit of a flag. But we all recognised that the risk adjustment that was in the system was a little bit on the weak side. And so you were allowed, when it came to reporting your data, and we all went back to you, was to put in what sort of practice you had, because we recognise that there's a great difference between dealing with a nephrectomy, a 5-centimetre tumour, to something that's had a pyelonephrosis in and there's a red-hot fungating kidney infection, or it's caval extension, etc. So one nephrectomy does not necessarily equal another nephrectomy. So you were allowed individually to, as it were, clarify your area of operative field. And we were the only specialty that did that. The others did not have that, and quite a few of the specialty associations have actually, given us some plaudits for that we did actually allow the individual to clarify, and particularly when it came to complications, to allow them to highlight something. And then the SH1T hit the fan on the 28th of June, when 7 out of the 10 technically published. Now, we didn't publish because we had said we got BAUS week 2 weeks before. We said we'll come in a week later. We had too much on our hands with BAUS, and I think that was a very wise move to get us under the radar, as it were. And as you know, the vascular surgeons took a huge hit. They were a little bit naive if you think that they gave the data to the journalists 2 days before to look at. And of course, they had the weekend to dissect out the negatives, which they certainly did with abundance. And everyone was saying this is going to open things up. Everybody's going to be wanting to know your data. Well, we had the massive number of 423 people hitting the website for our data in the first few days. Admittedly, most of them were new. The average time they spent looking at the data was about 5 minutes. And I would say, I don't know about you, but certainly from my experience of patients coming in to talk to me about nephrectomy, very few people have looked at my data. They might have looked at me on Google, but they certainly haven't looked at me on my data. So what lessons did we learn in this rush? Well, there was a huge issue about communication. I think there wasn't great communication between HQIP and the specialty associations. There were too many cooks, in my opinion, getting involved. You had HQIP, the English College wanting to stick their oar in, and the Federation of the Specialty Associations, all of whom were trying to put their slant on the system. And in the end, we just got on with it ourselves. The other problem was trusts seemed to be actually unaware of this scheme of things. They thought it was just the HQIP audits, not the other audits like ours. And because we're not nationally funded, we didn't come up on the radar. So suddenly they were hearing about this audit for the first time, often with only literally 3 or 4 weeks to go before the closing date. And so it did cause a lot of problems. We did actually write round to all the trusts. HQIP said they were going to write round to all the trusts to notify them, but we're not sure to what extent that really came through. The other lesson we learnt, well, a huge lesson, we were told at the beginning that we had to use CHR, which is a department under Brian Jarman at Imperial College, for our data analysis and statistical support. And what we'd done was we'd given them our 2011 data to play with, just to see what they could extract out. And it was desperate in the sense that we never really got anything out of them over the 2.5 months. And it was constantly, when are we going to see what it is so we can look at what's happened last year for this year? And in the end, Sarah, through her contacts at Dendrite from a few years ago, we went to them and they turned around the data that you saw previously in 3 days. So that was the end of that communication with Imperial College. The other problem we had, HQIP had suggested that we use this company called Light Media for the uploading of data and its sort of graphics, as it were, which was time consuming. As you can imagine, 600 JPEGs of data being uploaded into a table, that kept Sarah going a lot of time over weekends before the final deadline. So that's a thing to learn for the future. So then the other one is if you started to look at the ideal time scale and looking at the validation and the checking of the data, you need about a week post-closing date to check that you've got all the data in, because like all of us, it's like the abstract deadline for BAUS. It all comes in at the midnight or the minute before. You need about 3 weeks for checking and correcting by the contributors. So once we've got it, we put it together, we then send it back out to the individual to say, are you sure this is what it looks like? You need about 3 weeks for the data analyst to give them a good enough time to turn it round, and about 2 weeks to upload the data. And about 4 weeks for BAUS to, what I call, contact the trusts and individuals if there are issues. One of the things that we need to look at as an association is how are we going to QA the system? How do we know that what an individual has put in is true, and how are we going to validate, and how are we going to deal with surgeons whose data appears to fall outside the line? And, you know, this time round, everyone was within the goalpost because I set them so far apart. But the next time, we're going to have to bring it easier, closer and closer. And so I do have a concern about how we're going to QA it. And do we end up with someone, you know, from the region picking out 3 or 4 of your data sets and just saying, let's check it against the notes? Again, someone's got to go around and do that. That's time out, et cetera, et cetera. But we do have to look at how we're going to QA the whole process. HQIP have just announced on their website their key recommendations for next year, and I'll take you through it and then I'll tell you what we're going to do. They want more consultation and involvement of patients. They want all 10 specialty that published this year to improve on it for 2014, and as you'll see in a minute, we're doing that. They want 1 new specialty to step up to the plate for next year. Now, this is an interesting one. Funding should be available from NHS England via HQIP to support the process. We did actually bill HQIP just under 15,000 for the additional time for Sarah and Tricia to help us. And I have to say that was an underestimate of their time involved, because it's not cheap doing this. And they want the minimum requirements for publication to be defined by HQIP and NHS England. So essentially what they're saying is, unlike this time when we all chose what measures we were going to use, like orthopedics just chose length of stay and morbidity and mortality, we chose about 3 or 4 parameters. Next time they're saying, no, we will choose them and we'll tell you what we're going to have. They want activity and mortality together with 1 other quality measure. Risk adjustment, well, we've got that in, hopefully for next time, as I'll show you in a minute. To look at the research, analysis should be presented in a consistent format, and I'll show you that in a minute. Communications teams involved and specialties should have an input into the tendering process for analytical support. Well, I think we've got our own, how I would like to run it for the future from here. The other issue was the issue of the legal side with regards to people who either failed to enter their data or who were refused. And the new legal advice, because we were very worried, of course, that if someone had refused and found his data up there, that we were going to be challenged, quite understandably, by the individual concerned. And HQIP suddenly said, "Oh, don't worry, you don't need that legal requirement," and they're still saying that, but I have a concern. The HES code, now this is important, and it's something I think we do need to think about. We should look at HES into seeing how we can use HES to feed the data sets so that you're not having to enter everything again. And in particular, when you're coming on to the two prostate audits that you're talking about, the national prostatectomy audit and the section prostatectomy audit, that can we use HES to actually feed the generics and the demographics into it, and all you've got to do is update it, as it were, and try and make it a bit easier. And they want to produce the outcome data in a consistent format. Well, what have I said? Although HQIP wants an audit to cover every individual urologist in England, I've said this is an evolutionary process. We're going to do it, but we'll do it in our time, not theirs. Endo think that they can go for PCNL, and I know that you're talking about the radical prostatectomy. I have said that what we should do for 2014 is just upgrade the nephrectomy database with better risk adjustment, better delineation between the benign and malignants, and then that's going to be our process for 2014. And then in 2015, we will announce the endo and prostatectomy. So that gives you the whole of 2014 to work on your data. But there are other issues that we have to bring to the table. Our current IT platform for the data collection is Nevola, launched in 2008. It cost $66,000 to put together, but as I mentioned earlier, the participation rate before this year with the nephrectomy was only about 30%. And over the 5 years, we have put in the best part of $250,000 of BAUS money into the Nevola database. And that's a lot of money for what is poor take-up and poor usage. Now, James, who runs the Nevola database for us, was great to set it up, but he has indicated to us that he wants to move on and take his company into a different direction. So we are going to have to look at a new IT platform for the database. And we're going to have to look at tendering for the process, and we're beginning to put an options appraisal out there for companies who are interested, and then we will shortlist the top 2 or 3 and then work with them to draw up the detailed spec for the new database through next year. The data sets that we've got to date, Sarah has them or Tricia has them, so we haven't got enough one for everybody, but if people want to have a look, we do have them. But there is we've spent a lot of money on this system so far, and we can't keep throwing money at it. We have to be, if you like, a bit wiser and a bit more selective about how we use the data and audit system. Now, the aim of the whole process was the government thought that patients would look through NHS choices to choose their consultant. Now, I don't know about you, but as I said, I don't think many patients are looking at that. And if you actually go onto the NHS Choices website, it's quite hard to divvy down through the website to get to this page. And that has been raised with NHS Choices. So it's not easy unless you're pretty savvy at negotiating around websites to get the data that you want. My whole feeling was, we pay for it, we own the data, and we have it, as far as I'm concerned, on the BAUS website, and we do the links. And in that way, we've got control of the data. My big worry is if we hand it out to another body like HQIP, yes, they'll pay for it, very nice, but you've instantly lost control. And so I would just advise you cautiously that that's the route you should take in the future. And this is the latest slide that's just come out from HQIP, literally about 2 weeks ago. And this is how they want the future to be: a traffic light system for the individual on the left, and you'll be ticked green, or blue is the concern and red is the big concern. But what I'm more worried about is the star rating on the right there against potentially individuals, against the hospital. So my big worry is that we are looking, if you look at this as being their future, a league table. And I have huge worries about that. And I think we are going to have to be fairly robust in the way we respond to this. So I just wanted to finish with a huge thanks not only to you for actually signing up and joining, because you did say, you know, people did raise their concerns. I hope at the time I answered them fairly fairly, because quite understandably this was a challenge for a lot of you. But a special thanks to Sarah and Tricia for the hard work that they put in pulling all this together within the deadlines we have. It wasn't easy, and but I'm glad we got there. I'm glad we got under the radar without a huge hit, but they did an enormous amount of work. So thank you.